Half a dozen young women, hatless and shawled, came singing arm in arm along the road as we approached the main entrance of the monastery of Luc, a great arch in a white facade, through which we have a vista of a long, broad passage and a cloistered garden. When we tethered Roja to a ring on the wall, we entered the archway, passed through the garden, and entered a long, wide, white corridor, at the end of which Don Juan pulled a chain that set a bell jangling somewhere behind an iron gateway. After a few minutes' delay, a fat and cheerful man appeared, shook hands with us, said he was pleased to see us, and forthwith took us along the corridor to a chamber into which he disappeared. Then the fat, round face showed itself at a kind of box-office aperture in the wall. We observed that the box-office aperture had a curious effect on him. Immediately he ceased to be a host and changed himself into an official. We told him we craved the hospitality of Luc. He replied that Luc would be pleased to shelter us, give us beds, free charcoal and salt for as long as we desired. He could have told us all this outside the box office, but I think he felt that the invitation sounded more authentic when it was issued from the aperture. Thereupon he crossed the room to the largest and most mysterious chest we had ever seen. 12 feet in length it must have been, 5 in width and 4 in depth. It was the kind of chest that might have concealed all manner of mysterious things. The 40 thieves could well have hidden in it. When he raised the great creaking lid, he revealed a dazzling collection of snowy sheets and pillowcases, 1,000 heavy linen sheets in the chest, and 500 snowy pillowcases, and heaven knows how many towels. He passed 4 sheets and 2 pillowcases and 2 towels through his pigeonhole. He presented us with a big iron key, a romantic key that might have opened the oaken doors of a medieval castle. When he'd bestowed on us all that was our due, he closed the chest, came out, and immediately threw off his shroud of officialdom. He directed us to our room with the air of a fatherly butler who'd been with the family for 20 years. Then he left us to look after ourselves. Don Juan had put Roja to rest in the stables, and was sunning himself thoughtfully in the square. We told him we desired to eat. He shook his head. "It is forbidden to eat yet," he said. "First we should go to service in the chapel. I am waiting to escort you." "But we don't wish to go to service. You will go, and we shall go to eat." "But it is impossible to eat. The doors of the dining hall are locked against all during the service." Religion is a vivid reality to these island people. It is not a thing to be taken out of a cupboard on Sundays with the best hat and gown. It is as much a part of their daily life as sleeping and eating. You may have no religion yourself, but you cannot fail to be impressed by the beauty of their faith. So to the service we went, and when it ended we trooped out with the peasant crowd into the dining hall, and steak, artichokes, piles of fruit, and red wine. Before we went to bed that night, we wandered round the monastery in the dusk, for at this time Luc attains her greatest beauty. The moon slides up over the circling mountains, and the spiry rock formations that surround the monastery change from grey to silver, and among them Luc rises like a white palace of sleep. If you are troubled by the cares of the world, by the pains and penalties of civilization, you may find in this mountain refuge a peace that passeth all understanding. Inside those massive walls there is no sound to disturb you, unless it be the song of a nightingale that comes to you out of the night through an open window. And the only sound that is likely to awaken you in the morning will be the singing of a peasant girl who passes under your window. We left Luc behind us on a morning of burning sunshine and cooling breeze. Roja, after 2 nights in the monastery stables and 2 idle days, was so happy to be on the way again that she, at intervals, executed little joyous side skips, and as I was walking beside her, had to take precautions to protect my toes. We'd almost finished now with the rough mountain paths, for there is a fair road from Luc to Pollença. Once or twice we left the road to take some short cut among the rocks round the side of a mountain, and here Roja ceased her skipping. Her countenance grew serious, and the solemn expression in her big, gold-brown eyes was almost humorous. She chose her way among the rocks on a precipitous path with the sureness and care of a cat. But once she slowly slipped several feet down a treacherously smooth slab of rock on a path that sloped 1 foot in 3. She stopped cautiously at the end of the slide, grumbled in her throat, and turned such an apologetic face to her master behind that he burst into a laugh, slapped her haunches, and called her petite fromage, though she was less like a little cheese than any mule I've known. The endearment seemed to please Roja, for she continued her tortuous way with a new eagerness. If you would experience the most perfect method of travelling, ride upon a mule, under a Mediterranean sun, along a golden road that leads down from the mountains to the sea. It is a calm, effortless progress, to the accompaniment of a high-pitched metallic rhythm of minute hoofs on rock. It is free from all the anxieties and distractions of modern modes of travel, and invokes a state of dreamy abstraction that no other method of progress can invoke. It is the ideal progress for the dreamer or the discoverer. These mules of the mountains need no driving, no encouragement, and they know every rocky path from custom. They amble steadily and untiringly through gorges perfumed with thyme and honeysuckle and wild orchids, through shady groves of trees whose branches bend with the weight of lemons and oranges, then up again among the crags, so sure-footed where man can scarcely walk, that the mind of the rider ceases to be disturbed by thoughts of danger or by the need to superintend his progression. We reached Pollença in the late afternoon, after a 7-hour journey, during which we encountered only half a dozen people. There are several good fondas in Pollença, which is one of the larger towns of the island, having nearly 10,000 inhabitants, a large number for a Mallorcan town to possess. It was once a Roman town, though few relics of the ancient occupation remain. The streets are narrow and winding, the houses small and white, the people industrious and friendly. At almost every window and doorway you will see the women sitting at their work, making exquisite embroidery, or weaving, or spinning crude and sticky sheep's wool into yarn. Many of them sing as they work, and sometimes you may pass along a street that is filled with the sound of their rich, strong voices. Pollença is a happy town. You can feel its happy atmosphere as soon as you enter its streets, and the longer you stay, the more strongly this atmosphere grows upon you. We chose a fonda on Don Juan's recommendation. He insisted it was the best fonda in the town, and he looked bitterly disappointed when we suggested we might try another. He became even more insistent that we should stay at this particular fonda. But why should we stay there rather than any other? The spirit asked. Why, Senora? Because, he replied naively and with an honest grin, if you do not, you will most assuredly deprive me of the commission I shall receive for taking you there. We found the fonda as pleasant a place as Don Juan had boasted. Like all the Mallorcan inns, it was clean and efficient, the food was good, and the proprietress a good-hearted, contented woman, eager to please and ready to suffer any trouble to make her guests happy. She fed us sumptuously in the little white dining room. After we'd finished, Don Juan came from the kitchen where he'd been eating to receive his dues and to say farewell, for our journey with Roja ended at Pollença. It was with genuine regret that we parted, especially from Roja, whose almost human companionship was a perpetual charm during the mountain journeys. Don Juan shook hands with me, then bent and kissed the back of the spirit's hand with true southern courtesy. Before we parted, he asked if we would mention his name to any of our friends who might be coming to Mallorca and may desire his services. But if you need him, insist on having Roja also, for there is no mule like her in all Mallorca. After we'd given Roja a parting banquet of sugar and sweet cakes, we walked down to the puerto.De Pollença. This lies several miles from the town, at the end of a long, straight road that runs through cultivated fields and vineyards between two distant ridges of mountains. The long road opens into the centre of the Bay of Pollença. You emerge suddenly onto a semicircle of golden shore, and the wide arc of placid azure sea sweeps round to the purple mountains that guard the points of the bay. White and yellow houses, dwarf houses, the homes of dolls with blue and green sun shutters thrown wide, cluster round the gold and azure curve of the bay. A cafe here, a fonda there, with a white and shady terrace. Multitudes of fishing nets drying on the golden shore, where the bronzed fishermen sit repairing the damaged meshes. a red sail like the rusted blade of a scythe passing slowly out to sea. That is the Puerto de Pollença, a community of fisherfolk living life as it should be lived, unhurriedly, simply, contentedly. Many days we spent in Pollença and its port. The peace and beauty of the place and the charm of its people held us fast, so we were reluctant to pass on. We found we could rent a house on the mountain slopes at the side of the port for the Spanish equivalent of £1 a month, and having a house, we could live in comfort on 1 and 6pence a day each, for in Majorca one's needs are few and food is cheap. Fish may be had almost for the asking. You may have great lobsters and crabs brought wriggling to your door from the boats whose sails almost shadow your windows. Smugglers are always busy along the rocky coast beyond the bay. This I discovered in a curious way. One day we'd been refreshing ourselves in a certain cafe, which must be nameless for fear this book should fall into the hands of the Spanish excise officers, when I found that I'd exhausted my cigarettes. I asked the proprietor of the cafe, who was by this time a good acquaintance, the direction of the nearest tobacco booth. He replied that it was a good distance away, and after a slight hesitation added that he could supply me with a packet if I cared to have them. I thanked him, and he brought them to me. They were in an unfamiliar packet, but I didn't attach any significance to this until later in the day. Now among our acquaintances in Pollença was a handsome young member of the Civil Guard, whose ostensible purpose in life is to preserve to the best of his ability the peace and maintain the law of Pollença. In the evening we met this handsome young man, and we talked together, sitting at a table and drinking cognac at 3pence a glass. Presently, having a desire to smoke, I drew out my packet and first offered it to him. He looked at it, and he looked at me, and then raised his hand deprecatingly and turned away his head. "No, no, hombre," he said. "Put them away from me. Do not let me see you with them in your hands." In surprise, I asked him why. He answered briefly, "Contrabando." I asked him why he didn't arrest me. "I have seen no cigarettes," he said. "I have seen only a packet. I do not know what it contains." Once, he told us, there was a fisherman who frequently brought home as part of his catch a dozen large crabs. Now this was natural enough, but a certain civil guardsman, whose business it was to observe these things, noticed that the crabs were always the largest possible crabs, that their number never varied, and that they seemed always to be excessively lethargic crabs, making no effort to use their numerous legs for the purpose for which legs were granted to them by a beneficent providence. When the guardsman carried his observations further, he ascertained that they were dead crabs, long, long dead, and that their shells contained not fresh white flesh, but good black tobacco. There is a handsome income from the sale of crabs full of tobacco. We have lingered a long time in Pollença. We've explored the blue mountains that circle the peaceful town and its port. We've climbed the perilous peak to the ancient Castel del Rey that hangs on the edge of a precipice into whose depths you cannot gaze without a shrinking back to safety. We've bathed in the icy pools that are the children of foamy mountain torrents. But now it is time to pass on and return to Palma in order to take train to the caverns of Arta. To begin with the beginning of the train, the engine. It is a vast improvement upon Stephenson's rocket. It was made decades ago in the Midlands of England and is capable of an average speed of 18 miles an hour. It is a little engine, high-funnelled, and it wears important tanks at its sides. It puffs and steams and thrusts out its tanks as a fat little bantam cock ruffles out his feathers to impress his importance upon the hens. You cannot gaze upon a Majorcan railway engine without feeling that it's trying to impress its passengers and the toy coaches that cluster behind it like humble and grateful dependents. The engine that was to take us to Arta was all this and more when we reached the little terminus at Palma through the flowers and the palms that fill the station square. The day was Saturday, a busy one for the railway. Hordes of peasants have come from the furthest corners of the island into Palma in the early hours. They've crowded through the town, talked themselves into a fever in the marketplace, inspected the shops, spent a few of their hard-earned pesetas, and now, in the early afternoon, many of them are going home. It is an event. Everybody is excited, There is none of that calm acceptance of a railway journey as a common experience. There's a bewildering roar of hoarse voices that drowns the fussing of the Bantam engine, so that it hisses and puffs the more vigorously to emphasize the importance of its social position. Shawled women whose faces are aglow with the thrill of travelling push their purchases into the coaches, hurry away, rush back, scramble into the wrong coaches, into first-class coaches, scramble out, search for their purchases, find them, hurry with them to another coach where they've found friends and neighbours. The station is a tumult of adventurous humanity. Nut vendors struggle through the crowd, selling peanuts, walnuts and Brazils at 30 and 40 centimos a time. Nuts are the national sustenance for railway journeys. Everybody buys them. We buy some. The vendor opens my pocket and pours them in. A wet, warm bulb is pressed into the back of my neck, and a pitiful, high-pitched bleat sounds in my ear, whereupon a brown giant of a man behind me apologizes, laughing, and wades past with a ewe lamb tucked under each arm. Here is a woman with a black hen imprisoned under her shawl. Its head protrudes at her breast, its beak moves in hoarse and dreary protest, and its eyes have the expression of startled indignation of a hen with whom gross liberties are being taken. Here is a man with 2 bundles of dried fish hanging round his shoulders. One of the bundles swings out and delivers a blow upon another man's ear. But everybody laughs, nobody cares, nobody falls into a rage. A shrill warning from the preposterous Bantam engine, a final scramble of humanity. Doors slam and swing negligently open again as the train sways and grinds its way slowly out of the station. We have begun the great adventure, a journey of 45 miles. The Mallorcan railway coach is built for utility, not for luxurious travelling. We are in a second-class coach because there is no third class. The coach is divided into compartments by waist-high partitions. The seats are narrow planks, 18 inches wide, and we cannot lean back, for the partition is so constructed that it catches the shoulders and forces the body to a forward incline. First-class compartments are upholstered in bright red, but they give little comfort. There is but one notice on the wall of the coach. We are not asked to refrain from any of those objectionable and dangerous habits that are invariably the subject of exhortations by railway companies. We are merely asked not to blaspheme. Travellers who blaspheme in the carriages of the railway company, says the notice, will be fined from 5 to 50 pesetas, and, adds the notice, if they cannot pay, they will spend the rest of the day in prison. I do not know how the fine is graduated, though one may presume that the amount will depend upon the nature of the blasphemy. Doubtless a simple goddamn would cost you no more than 5 pesetas. There is a satisfaction in having to pay for your swearing, a greater relief in knowing that by giving vent to your feelings you are defying the law. The windows of the coach rattle vigorously, the wheels grind and bump, and small pieces of coal from the engine, which even now will not let us forget its existence, fly in at the windows and sting our faces, but nobody cares. Everybody is happy and talkative and friendly. When the train has attained a velocity of 14 miles an hour, each bump of the wheels jars the whole coach. They make a peculiar rhythm, these Mallorcan wheels, a deliberate and well-defined 1, 2, 3, 4, as though they were square instead of round. Every railway has its own particular song of the wheels, but I have heard none so regular as the Mallorcan song. If you listen to the rhythm of a French train, you'll observe that it's usually 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, with an occasional lapse into 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, then back to 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. The rhythm of the trains of the Spanish mainland is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 defined by separation, then 2, 3, 4 at breathless speed. It has less variety than the French train song, which will seize upon some thought in your mind, translate it into words, and repeat it to you with a relentless insistence that in time threatens your sanity. The greater variety of the rhythm gives the wheels a greater command of words, and enables it the better to seize upon your thoughts. If you're in the process of some emotional disturbance, the French rhythm will find out your secret before you've travelled a mile. It will taunt you by repeating your dominant thought until the end of your journey. You may be in an agony of mind over the illness of a friend, or over a business deal or a love affair. The wheels will set your dominant fear to their rhythm and throw it back at you in ridiculous words that you would never have chosen yourself. I know a tempestuous young man who, crossing France on an urgent and emotional mission, was tortured all through that long and weary night journey by the absurd and melodramatic words, "I've lost, her I've lost, I've lost, her I've lost," from which you may easily gather the nature of his mission. But the Mallorcan train will play none of these tricks upon you. The rhythm of the wheels is so stolid, so practical and matter-of-fact, so unimaginative, that words will not fit themselves to its beat. It is incapable of seizing upon your thoughts and hammering them out for you against your will. You may travel in peace, with your thoughts undisturbed. There are many diversions for the traveller on a Mallorcan railway journey. The first occurred soon after we left the terminus. A swarthy, unshaven fellow with a long, thin cigar between his lips appeared with disconcerting suddenness on the footboard outside and thrust his head through the window. "Buenas, boletas, boletas, gracias, gracias, senor." He grins amiably as he thrusts his arm through the window and snaps his ticket punch. Tickets are handed along the compartment. He glances at them, clips them, collects those whose owners alight at the next station, then swings off along the footboard, hanging perilously to the hand grips, the wind blowing through his hair and sending behind him a trail of vicious smoke from his cigar. Nor is the footboard restricted to his use. Any passenger may open the door of his compartment and swing himself from end to end of the train if he should desire an airing or a conversation with some friend in another coach. We looked from the window when the guard had gone and saw half a dozen men standing on the narrow footboard, every one with his head through a window, talking vigorously to an acquaintance while the train bumps its way across the island. The guard is an agile fellow. He doesn't drive the footboard conversationalists back to their compartment so he may pass, but swings perilously around them and goes on without interrupting their social intercourse. And all the while the railway winds through the valleys, avoiding the blue mountains, for tunnels are costly and difficult structures. Why should one go through a thing expensively when one can so easily go round it cheaply? This must surely have been the argument of the engineers who built the railway, for you will see that they meticulously edge away from anything in the nature of a hill. They build economically, knowing that a railway in this island of peasants would not prove too profitable a venture, and everywhere one may observe the care with which they have eliminated the unnecessary. The level crossing is a masterpiece of economy. There are many of them along the track, each with a small white cottage to house the wrinkled old woman who is its guardian. When the train bumps its way towards the crossing, you may see her emerging with a small flag in her hand. Her task requires little strength. She has no levers to manipulate, no heavy wood frame to swing out. She takes a cord that's attached to a post, walks across the roadway, and hitches it to another post. That is her gate, and she has closed it. When the train has passed, she rolls up her cord, and the crossing is clear. Sometimes the gate has little strips of coloured cloth or paper attached at intervals, like a bird scare in a garden, for fear you should not see the plain, undecorated cord. And the old woman is unfailing in the practice of her important ritual. There may be neither man, woman, nor sheep within 10 miles of her, but still she will stretch her piece of string across the road. The train stops at Inca, and when the grinding of its wheels has ceased, we hear the sound of high words in the next coach, high words from a woman and protesting, conciliatory words from a man. Then from the coach steps the man with his 2 bundles of dried fish. He is one of the finest of the island types, tall and lean and strong, eyes shining with his vitality, a quick, flashing smile, features mobile, expressive, and stamped with the fineness of old Rome. He puts his head in at our window and speaks in the patois in a hoarse, rapid voice, with a laugh breaking through his words. The other travellers laugh and look at us expectantly, and one man asks me in Spanish if we object to travelling with fish. We sniff simultaneously. No, we do not object. Why should we? The fish is good. It is good, yes, he replied, but there is a little trouble in the next coach with a woman. She comes from Alcudia, where her man was a fisherman. He was drowned, and now she will not suffer fish. She will not eat fish, nor look at fish, nor travel with fish. Aye, it is a pity with so much fish in Mallorca, and so cheap. Since we do not object, the fish is tossed under the seat. It is such dry fish that one imagines it would soak up a full bucket of water. It is like very old parchment, crumbling and dusty, and in dust it lies under the seat. We all begin to eat nuts, and in 10 minutes the floor of the carriage is half an inch deep in shells that rustle like autumn leaves with every movement of a foot. There are 8 in the carriage, all men with the exception of the spirit, and the woman with the hen. She's taken the bird from beneath her shawl and is holding it in her lap, where it slowly droops off into a doze, awakening occasionally to utter a shrill and startled protest. One of the men, a brown fellow whose face is sullen in repose but merry when he smiles, says that perhaps the hen is laying an egg. The woman replies that it couldn't start laying early enough for her. She lifts up the hen and looks in her lap, but there was no egg. Everybody laughs. So the journey passes in talk and nut-eating until the train reaches Manacor. Here the owner of the dried fish appears again, this time with a bag of gaudy sweetmeats, which he passes round the compartment, presumably to express his thanks for the guardianship we've established over his fish. Every time we stop at a town, the train loses a coach, so that for the final stage to Artar, we have but 2 small coaches packed with chattering, laughing, gesticulating humanity. After we've passed Manacor, the spirit produces a map, and this creates a new and profound interest. We spread it on our knees, and the other travellers join us in our scrutiny with the eagerness of children concentrated on a picture book. One of them, an old man with thick black hair, has never seen a map of his island. He is surprised at the size of it and the number of its towns and villages, for the map is on a large scale, showing every hamlet and farmhouse. He sits back presently and meditates with a little rapt smile. I think he feels a stirring of pride that Mallorca is so big and important-looking and bright-coloured. The train emerges from a labyrinthine way through close, packed mountains where it's been twisting and turning for a quarter of an hour. The engine screams, the hen clutters, the peasants begin to gather up their goods. Our Roman friend swings himself along the footboard and claims his bundles of dried fish. Artar at last. There are 2 men, the owners of fondas, who always meet the incoming foreigner at Artar. One is tall, fat, and self-assertive. The other is thin, quiet-voiced, almost apologetic. Although the self-assertive fellow forces himself to your notice by his determination to get you, the quiet old man attracts you by his gentle manner and the expression of mild inquiry in his eyes. The big man boomed towards us possessively, flourishing a card on which were set forth the advantages of his house. Fonda, Fonda, the best in all Artar. The little mild man trotted towards us with the air of a dog that wishes to be taken notice of, but is not quite sure of the reception it will get. Antigua Fonda, muy Antigua. That is his masterstroke, the Antigua. It's printed on the card, which he produces tentatively in the hope that we may care to confirm his boast. Antigua. He knows that foreigners, for reasons that are obscure to the big man, will invariably choose to stay in a house that is ancient rather than in one that is new, and this knowledge he uses to good effect. The word Antigua he regards as his talisman. It is a magic word that no foreigner can resist. Yet it is not the only magnet that draws travellers to his house. His manner is the greater attraction. There is a gentle, old-fashioned courtesy about him that substantiates his quiet boast of Antigua. Instinctively, we turn our backs on the big, possessive man and accept the hospitality of the friendly dog, who trots beside us while his rival loudly jeers, thereby revealing his chagrin and the smallness of his nature. Later on, we discover that the little man is nearly always the winner in these encounters. It is a common fallacy that the qualities revealed in the big and possessive man, usually summed up by the vulgar but expressive word push, are the qualities that win success. This big innkeeper has enough push to move Puig Mayor, yet he lacks the one quality that transforms push from an ineffective expenditure of energy into a force. He lacks personality. One hears him and sees him, and there is an end of him, whereas one scarcely sees or hears the little man, yet one feels his presence all the while, even though his personality be only that of a friendly dog. The Antigua Fonda enjoys its age in a narrow street far up the town. Its antiquity is advertised by a glass sign displayed over the door. I suppose the house may be a few centuries old. It's cramped in among the other low houses in the street, and its dark entrance hall is lined with the chairs of hospitality like any other Majorcan home. The narrow stairs from the entrance hall wind up to another dim hall, on each side of which are 3 small bedrooms with low ceilings, red-tiled floors, and wooden beds that creak abominably when we sit on them. Presently, the friendly dog came up and asked us whether we had any special preferences in the matter of food. He said he would tell us what there was for dinner, which he called cena, or supper, and then he trotted away and we forgot him. But 5 minutes later he reappeared in the company of a plump, smiling peasant woman and a shy, Madonna-like girl, each of whom held an array of dishes on which were displayed a variety of uncooked foods. He asked us to make a selection. This was a distinctly novel method of ordering dinner, to select in your bedroom the food you would eat later in the dining room. There were the inevitable lamb chops, a good assortment of vegetables, rice, fish, and fruits. We made a selection, and the 3 went away in single file down the stairs, carrying the piled dishes like high priests conveying a votive offering to the altar of their god. It is a curious custom, and for a time we discussed it, trying to decide upon its origin. I developed an ingenious theory that it was a relic of the days when kings and nobles employed food tasters, and poison was more freely administered than it is today. The commoner, unable to afford a taster, would examine the food himself before it was cooked. But the spirit declared this to be nonsense. When you go to an inn, she said, you are taken to inspect your bedroom before you sleep in it, just to see if you like it. Why shouldn't the same principle be applied to food? This was an explanation whose sound practicality put an end to any romantic and unconvincing theories. When we went down in quest of the food we'd chosen, we were led out of the entrance hall through one small tomb-like dining room into a second tomb-like dining room. It was evidently a room reserved for guests who might be regarded as distinguished, and we were compelled to express our preference for sociability. The friendly dog thereupon took us into the outer room, where we sat at a long table with 2 men, one of whom surprised us by expressing the following greeting in English. Very much like to see you, thanks, yes. Could be happy revealing for you all things about Tar, that is very interesting town when you know. We thanked him for his good intentions and fell into conversation. He had a wealth of information but little power to express it. He told us that he was an official of the state. He was appointed by the government to take charge of the government's postal service between Palma and Artar. He was, in short, a post office clerk. He was a pleasant little man, eager to be of service to us, and we listened patiently while he told us everything we already knew about Artar and gave us a list of all the things we'd already planned to see. Afterwards, we went out into the town and looked upon it from the church at the top of the hill. All round the church there are great walls 30 feet high, on the top of which one may walk to take the air and view the country. Artar lies below, a white crescent of a town half circling one side of the hill, with flat-roofed houses in the style of the Moors. Rising up and away on every side are the blue mountains, nothing but mountains, and in the dusk the perfect crescent of the town looks like the moon fallen to earth. At night the narrow streets are thronged with strolling women in their shawls, with their long plaits of hair hanging down their backs. Up and down they go. They have no other amusement. They walk and talk and stand about in groups, and the streets are full of the sound of their voices. There is no other sound in all the town but the clamour of voices in the night air. The next morning, after the friendly dog had taken us on the flat roof, pointed out to us everything of interest within sight, named every mountain that had any pretensions to greatness, and proudly emphasized the antiquity of the Fonda by drawing attention to the weather-worn state of the stone parapet, We started for the great stalactite caves 12 miles away at the coast, and on the way a slight diversion brought us to one of the stone camps of the ancient and obscure Iberians. It circles a rocky hill, and its walls of gigantic stones, piled one upon the other, are in places half concealed by the growth of trees and bushes. There has been no attempt at preservation. There is no necessity for preservation. This monument to the crude strength of ancient man, whose little life and whose unimportant battles have never been recorded, has been preserved by virtue of its own colossal strength. We enter the encampment by a gateway 10 feet high, 2 perpendicular pillars of stone with one massive stone thrown across their tops. The 2 great upright stones have not moved 1 inch from the perpendicular in 4,000 years. There is a wilderness of broken rock inside, and away in the centre the great conical mound, the point of vantage, the heart of the fort. We climb to the top, sit down, and try to get the atmosphere of the place by repopulating it with the ancients who so long ago built this indestructible gateway and lifted these massive stones one upon the other for their protection. The predominant thought of these primitive men was self-preservation. The walls express their thought and tell the story of their fears. Self-defense, which to them was an actuality always present in their minds, has become to us a more remote necessity, since we pay taxes to have other people protect us. To them, preservation was a matter of strong walls and a heavy club. To us, it's resolved itself into the possession of a banking account. We have shifted the responsibility. We club our enemies with gold coin and long credit. We even protect ourselves from the elements on the installment plan. The lonely road to the caves winds first through a cultivated plain, but becomes rough and uneven when it leaves the fields for the barren, rocky land. We passed a family of charcoal burners as we approached the coastal mountains. 2 men, several boys, 2 wild, half-naked little girls, and 2 women, one of whom was washing herself in the sunshine outside the stone hut. Presently she seized one of the boys and began to wash him also. He protested in the manner of little boys, with loud yowls and whimperings, and the girls immediately took fright and scampered away defiantly among the rocks. We could see them peering out, maliciously enjoying the sight of their brother's torture. But when they caught sight of us, they forgot the suffering boy and began to follow us, circling round us among the rocks and keeping themselves hidden whenever we turned to look at them. They kept this up for more than a mile, and nothing would induce them to come near us. We rattled some copper coins. This attracted them, but they would not approach near enough to take the tempting pennies. The lonely life these children lead amid the rocks and the pine woods makes them shy of strangers. They are as timid as fox cubs and as wild as wolves. We lost the children soon afterwards, and then, through a grove of pines, we came upon the most exquisite bay in all Mallorca. Blue mountains enclose it. Pine trees grow down to the golden sickle of sand, where a turquoise sea ripples in to meet the mountain stream that sparkles across the shore. Sunshine and silence and loneliness. The world of men lost and forgotten, not even a house to destroy the illusion of universal peace. It is untouched, unspoiled. For once, nature has escaped the improving hand of man. You who have craved for an island in the South Seas need go no further than this bay. Here you will find air as languorous as any that the Pacific can offer. You who loathe the sight and sound of man may escape him here, until you hear the crowing of a cock away there through the trees. You know then that man is not far from you. We went in search of him, and found woman, fat of body and shiny of face. She came out of a little white hut at the foot of the mountain that guards the left point of the bay, and when we asked her the way to the caves, she called to a youth who lay sleeping under the pines at the back of the hut. He scrambled to his feet, rubbed his eyes, and informed us that he was a guide. Now, as a rule, we have a strong objection to guides. They are the curse of explorers. Their mechanical claptrap is fatal to the atmosphere of romance you may be trying to capture. They insist upon telling you all the things you know and none that you wish to know. They think that unless they maintain an incessant babble, they are not earning their money. Few of them understand that there are moments when silence is imperative for full enjoyment. Yet, in the matter of the caves, it was wiser to have a guide. Parties have gone alone into the heart of this mountain, we had heard, and have never come out of it. We therefore accepted the youth's services, but we determined to deal firmly with him if he should attempt to spoil any effects by unnecessary explanations. He was silent enough as he led us up the narrow path that climbs round the side of the mountain. Through pine woods it climbs, through rocks red and grey, until we are out of the bay and high above the open sea on a precipitous ledge. The path curves round and up the mountainside for a mile, and suddenly we are face to face with a vast, dark cavern in the side of a rose-tinted precipice. The entrance must be 40 feet high, and beneath it are 50 or more steep, rough-built steps by which we mount from the perilous pathway. We climb and peer into the blackness, but can see nothing. It is a terrifying cavern, vast, black, silent. It might be the lair of a mythological dragon, and that ledge below might be the spot where beautiful virgins were tied for the annual sacrifice. Anything might come out of this cavern, so silent and mysterious it is. The youth disappeared in the darkness and emerged with an acetylene flare, from which he succeeded in producing a light after 10 minutes of experimenting. He held it above his head, and we followed him into the cavern. The black silence of the mountain closes in on us. The cavern is so enormous that the acetylene flare becomes as insignificant as a candle. At our feet we see the beginning of a flight of rocky stairs, steep and without handrails. On either side, black depths of space. Down we go, down into the heart of the mountain, deeper and yet deeper. The great hole in the precipice through which we've just entered has diminished to the size of a saucer. Now it disappears entirely, the steps come to an end, the acetylene flare sputters and goes out. In the darkness we can hear the soft movements of the guide as he fumbles to relight it. But we hear something else, the drip of 1,000 separate drops of water, loud, bold, infrequent splashes, soft, rapid patterings like a multitude of tiny feet running across the rock, little hissing whispers. Then, from a distance, a loud, gurgling chuckle, like the malicious laugh of a demon hiding in the darkness. The light flares up, brighter and brighter until it dazzles, and then the beauty of the place begins to be revealed. We are in a great hall, a cathedral. Pillars rise up to the invisible dome, pillars so immense that you cannot circle them with your arms, pillars slender and fluted and knotted, columns that sparkle like jewels, throwing off emerald and ruby lights. At our feet is a round heap of hard black basalt that flashes light from 1,000,000 facets. The guide passes through an opening at the far side of the cathedral, and we are in another cavern. We pass from cavern to gallery, gallery to corridor, corridor to cavern for more than a mile in the depths of the mountain, and everywhere we thread our way through gigantic stalactite pillars. Everywhere we hear the unending patter and whisper of the mineral rain that's been building these pillars through unrecorded ages of the past and will continue to build them through the eons of the future. Some of the stalactites are more than 100 feet in length, reaching from roof to floor, and only when you know that a growth of a few inches may be the work of 1,000 years will you realize the millions of years that have gone to the making of some of these gigantic pillars. Some of the columns are in the process of formation. The stalactite is growing down, the stalagmite growing up to meet it, and there is a gap of 10 feet between the two. 20,000 years may pass before the two are joined. Then the process of thickening will begin. 100,000 years, and perhaps the perfect column will have been formed. We cannot gaze upon these stupendous creations of nature without a sense of wonder. We've come to regard the architectural creations of man as the supreme art of the builder. Yet the power of man is dwarfed by the power of a single drop of water that, repeating itself through the centuries, has built these pillared halls in the heart of a mountain. While we are here, inside the silent mountain, let me tell you the story of the part these caves have played in the deliverance of Majorca. 700 years ago, when King James the Conqueror was driving the Moors out of the island, his victorious troops swept up to Artar in pursuit of the enemy. Down the valley to the bay fled the retreating Moors, 1,500 panic-driven men with their women and children, their cattle and their wealth. Behind them, the avenging army. Before them, the sea or the caves. They chose the caves. Into the heart of the mountain went the men with their women and children, their cattle and their wealth. They were safe here, for no army could reach them. They built a palisade round the mouth of the entrance, and there they spent their days in the dripping silence, waiting, hoping for heaven knows what miracle to deliver them. James was checked, but only temporarily. One night, 2 of his officers, concealed by the darkness, were lowered by ropes down the cliff to the wooden defences at the cavern's mouth. Carefully, silently they worked, and presently a flame leaped up, then another, until the defences went up in a blaze. Inside the mountain, 1,500 men, with their women and children, their cattle and their wealth, coughed and choked in the darkness as the smoke drifted in on the breeze from the sea, smoke that swirled from one cavern to the next, slowly, and filled the heart of the mountain. They fought against it, but there was no hope, nothing for them but surrender, and soon they filed out with their cattle and their wealth, leaving the caverns to the patter and whisper of its architectural reign. When we emerged from the mountains, we were ravenous, for the air of the caverns is cold and invigorating. Our guide told us that his mother would prepare us a meal, and when we reached the small white hut at the bottom of the mountain slope, we went into her kitchen to find out what she could give us. Paella, pollo, fruta, vino. We went out and sat at a rough wooden table in front of the hut and beneath the pines at the edge of the rippling bay. While we sat there, talking, we heard the sound of a vigorous pursuit among the pines. A moment later, a distraught fowl fluttered and squawked round the hut, pursued by the youthful guide. The chase circled our table. Then the unfortunate fowl made off towards the other side of the bay. The youth followed, grimly determined. He was catching our lunch. It is an exciting experience, watching one's lunch being caught. When one's lunch possesses wings, there's always a doubt whether it will be caught, and when one is hungry, this uncertainty gives a greater interest in the chase. We watched anxiously. We saw our lunch dart among the pines, then out again to the shore of the bay. It bore along the water's edge, and here it gained considerably, for the soft sand increased the difficulties of pursuit. Back again to the trees. Here the pursuer tried cunning. He paused, nonchalantly put his hands in his pockets, and gazed casually around him, as though the thought of capturing a fowl had never entered his mind. Our lunch cocked its head, stared at him suspiciously, and passed the time of day by giving a desultory peck or two at the ground. The pursuer looked at the lunch out of the corner of his eyes. A quick dart, a squawk and a flutter, out onto the sands again, through the stream, round the hut, up the first slope of the mountain, and out of sight. The old woman appeared at the hut door, and cried shrilly to the youth to hurry himself. She was answered by a triumphant shout, and presently he came scrambling down the slope with the fowl in his arms. The old woman took it inside her hut. After a few seconds, there was a hoarse, wailing cry, followed by an ominous silence, and we knew that the bird would be pursued no more. But the incredible thing was that in 15 minutes its flesh was served up to us. The bird had been plucked, prepared, and cooked in so short a time that we could scarcely believe it would be eatable. Yet it was excellent, cooked to a rich brown and shining with olive oil. We enjoyed it, even though we'd watched its heroic struggle for survival and heard its death cry. Hunger has no respect for hypersensitive scruples. We travelled the last 3 miles back to Artar in a cart with 2 young farmers and a bag of fish. We saw their string-bottomed vehicle coming up behind us at a great pace, and the spirit was tired, for we'd walked nearly 20 miles. "I am going to take a lesson from Watts," she said. She climbed onto a wayside stone, sat wearily upon it, and became immediately a modernized tableau of hope. The cart came on, the young farmers gazed, the cart passed, stopped, returned, and we were invited to ride back to Arta. We had our first introduction to the folk songs and music of the island during a noisy journey from Arta to Inca by diligence. At the last moment before we started, an elderly man who had the litheness and vigour of youth ran up to the diligence and scrambled in, breathless and laughing. He held a sackcloth bundle in one hand, and in the other a Spanish guitar. He talked volubly for 10 minutes after the start, telling anybody who cared to listen the reason for his hurry, telling where he was going, why he was going there, and when he proposed to return. The spirit began to examine his guitar. He handed it to her. "Play to us, Senora, play," he shouted above the rattle of the diligence. She laughed and told him she was not skilled in the use of the instrument. "You shall play to us," she said. "Yes, yes, play to us," came the chorus from the other passengers. He needed no other invitation, and he began to strum the guitar. He played little, sad, slow melodies, and presently he began to sing in a deep, rich voice some of the songs of the peasants. We weren't able to gather much of the verses during the noisy, jolting journey, but afterwards, when we reached Palma, we collected some of the words and music with the assistance of Senor Don Antonio Pol, the Mallorcan composer, who's made a study of the songs of the island and published a number of the melodies. And reaching Palma means only one thing. With 3 short, piercing blasts of a siren, the cluttering of 1,000 fowl, the bleating of a goat, the stamping of 500 frightened rabbits, Rey Jaime is casting her moorings. We are leaving Majorca. The boat is crowded with chattering humanity, and the sides of her decks are piled high with crates of livestock. The sound of a guitar is heard from the shore, growing fainter across the slow increasing space between boat and quay. The musician is a tall, brown fellow, surrounded by 4 companions. A man and woman on board are waving to him, craning over the piled crates. The musician is strumming one of the songs of the island, a song of farewell. So, with the sad, slow melodies of the island music haunting our minds, let us leave the Isle of Tranquility. We are going not with too great an eagerness for reunion with the familiar things of home, but with too strong a regret for the loss of that simplicity and harmony of life that we are forsaking. We are taking with us the memory of many smiles, many kindnesses, many rich personalities, many acquaintances, and a few friends. In exchange, we shall have the old, familiar things of normal life that now seem so remote. The homebound wanderer who has travelled with an unprejudiced mind and an open heart must inevitably discover that the pleasure of the return is tempered by some degree of regret for the loss of new-found beauties. In moments of retrospect, the memory of a smile, or of a kindness, or of some tranquil hour of perfect sunlit harmony will engender a vague sadness that one is loath to dispel. Only the dyspeptic, the misanthrope, and the superior person can return to the normal with unalloyed satisfaction. We are neither dyspeptic, nor misanthropic, nor superior, so that our journey back to the north is tinged with vague regret and a sense of loss. Back to the murk and clatter of London we come, to the old familiar things that somehow seem to have faded during our absence. Even one's favourite Kelim seems to have lost its colour. Yet we know that the fault lies in ourselves, rather than in any omission by a faithful retainer. There is a sense of desolation in London this rainy summer day, almost an unfriendliness, or at the very least a lack of enthusiasm for our return, until the dog reappears. If you have ever been greeted by a dog who's been pining for your presence during months of absence, a dog who on sight of you so completely loses control of his tail that his whole tempestuous body vibrates and dithers with the violence of the emotion expressed by that appendage, whose more than human soul glows in his eyes with an intensity that puts your own vapid enthusiasms to shame, then surely will your sense of loss and desolation be dispelled, and the colour of your old life be revived. It is reviving for us now, in spite of the one small tragedy that mars our return. We search for our other and smaller friend, the fly, and at last we find him, stiff and lifeless, dried up crouching in a corner of a window ledge where he'd crawled in hopeless quest of sunshine and warmth, a victim of an English summer. We shall give him a fitting burial in the window box, and his requiem shall be one of the truest of the melodies of Majorca.